You know, probably the hardest things to really perform or accomplish that Christ gave all Christians instructions relevant thereto is to pray according to an outline He gave, and really mean it. And mean it, into the innermost being of oneself. Over here in Matthew 6, His disciples had come to Him and asked Him, about praying. He says, teach us to pray. And He went on to say, in verse 9 of Matthew 6, after this manner, therefore, pray you. Not that we, were to, in a rote manner, just repeat it. As I've heard some churches, they just repeat the Lord's Prayer. This is not really the Lord's Prayer here. The Lord's Prayer was in John 17, the one He offered up. This was just an outline that He showed. Now, here's the basic framework. Of course, you can fill in, alter this, of course, but basically, here's the type framework that God the Father and Jesus Christ would have all of their children follow, because it's an order of priorities. After this manner, therefore, pray you, our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be your name. There are any number of ways of recognizing God, His power, His universe, His position, with Christ at His right side, with the four living beings, the 24 elders, the archangels, and the myriad of angels that assist God in His vast realm of His holdings, and the fact He's lived forever, He's accomplished everything, He knows everything, He has a perfect mind, unlimited ability, and on and on. And, to begin to envision just what God is, and then realize how puny all of us put together are by way of comparison. But there has to be a means of comparison before one begins to feel like exalting God and praising His name and really feeling an outpouring, of praises and acknowledgments to God. So, our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come. Now, you have to, of course, see the dire need of that and the predicament that nations are in, and the suffering that has gone on and is going on and will yet go on. And how very incapable and futile man is in his attempts to govern himself. And then begin to see how sloppy and rotten and wretched and deficient and wrongly geared are men's governments, as opposed to God's perfect government that's going to bring justice to all, and blessings to all, and opportunities to all, and a future to all. So we need to see it, God's kingdom by way of comparison, and then we begin to have that urge to a greater degree of wanting to see it established. So he said, and then you pray for God's kingdom to come, that His will be done in earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Or supply our needs, and God knows them. And He usually supplies a lot more than our needs, but at least He's promised if we are seeking Him to provide our needs. And He's the one, of course, that determines our needs. If He let us determine, we'd all have, well, maybe not everyone, we'd all have a whole parking lot full of Cadillacs, and we'd have a summer home, a winter home, and a spring home, and a fall home, and a home south in the southern hemisphere, one in the northern hemisphere, and jet planes, and on and on. It's amazing how we would kid ourselves, into thinking that's a need. Well, I have a need of that. Because the northern might blow and need to be south. Or it might get too hot and need to be north. So He doesn't let us determine our needs. He says He will provide them. And then, of course, a lot more He lavishes upon us in addition. And forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors, or forgive us of our sins as we're willing to forgive those who have wronged us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one, as it should be translated, not just from evil. Of course, He's the source of all of it, but He's the instigator, therefore deliver us from the evil one and all of his strategies and evil undertakings. For yours is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. Amen. Now, it's difficult to really put our hearts into a prayer, according to this outline. Because on the one hand, we don't see God's greatness and what His kingdom is going to bring about and that world to come and that family that's going to result and what kind of an abundant, prosperous, fulfilling life all of those billions in that family are going to live on an ever-increasing basis forever. And see that in such a way that we'd say, I wouldn't even begin to turn loose of the calling in that future, even if I were offered the entire world. Then on the other hand, perhaps we don't pray that as much for it because we don't see the horrors that lie just around the corner. It's too easy to think that because the sun shines and the trees leaf out and some birds still sing, and crime is not, since crime is not just at the door, to sort of blind their eyes to conditions in the world. And so we don't see what's just ahead, and we don't fear it in the right way, and ask God, please help us to see it, to want to be delivered from it, and to pray that we are delivered from those things that are to come. So I think those are the two basic things. We fail to see the crying need for that kingdom because of the conditions extant in the world today, and what man is about to plunge himself into, a condition in which all life would be destroyed except God intervene to prevent it. And then on the other hand, the glory of that world to come, that God himself is going to bring about through his government and his kingdom, and we're actually going to become members of that very kingdom and help bring it about. So we need the urge to participate in that coming world and that coming government. Then we need to see the crying need of that by understanding the conditions extant in the world today. I think those are basically the reasons. Over here in Luke 21, Christ admonished us in Luke 21, verse 36. He said, "Watch you therefore, and pray always, that you be accounted worthy to escape those things that shall come to pass and to stand before the Son of Man." If a person begins to really see what is going to come to pass in the very near future, everything that has to do with prophecy in the end time is to be fulfilled in this generation, from the time Mr. Armstrong was called, and by the time one full generation takes its course, all of these things will have culminated and led into the world tomorrow. If people really saw what was just around the door, I'll guarantee you if they had to swim, they'd be here. They really would. But because they don't really see what's just around the corner, people take God for granted. And they're careless toward God. And they think God winks at their conduct. Well, God's going to be almost ready to shed some tears, but not because he understands the condition. He doesn't let that kind of emotion get him. But he sees that people like that are actually headed toward a great tribulation when they're going to be deprived of everything, including their own lives. And if they make it, they're going to lose their heads. They're going to have to stand up and really be counted. I'd rather just keep mine. I'd rather not have to go through that kind of suffering. But God says if we don't do his work today, when the Philadelphian era is taken, what remains behind constitutes the Laodicean area of lukewarm people. And God is either going to make them or break them. He's either going to set them alight and build a fire, kindle a fire in them, or else he's going to scrap them. But he will not bring a person who's lukewarm into his family. And then in the world tomorrow go out in a very lukewarm manner and half-heartedly represent God and his kingdom and the glory to come. You go to someone in the world tomorrow and say, I'm a spirit being, but, God would have you come to Sabbath. I don't think it's all that important. I never did feel it was that important. I never did really get stirred up to obey God. And I just don't think you people ought to get stirred up. And he wants you to tithe, but let me tell you, I never did myself. And he let me in spite of it. And I had all these attitudes. I just hated my neighbor and my enemies, and everyone's almost my enemy because no one understood me. And I just don't think God's fair in wanting you people to do all this. That's what God would see in an individual who's lukewarm. He couldn't depend on him representing him strongly and firmly and fully to everyone and encourage others to become like God and to follow the example of one who knows and can point out the way. So we ought to watch and pray always that we be accounted worthy to escape what is just around the corner and probably not very many years off. And you could read, of course, Luke 21 about all the horrors, men's hearts failing them for fear of those things coming upon the earth. Have you ever been in a real bad electrical storm, where you didn't know if the lightning was going to hit you the next minute or not, and the fear really begins to well up in you. Or, to be caught maybe in severe floodwaters, and they're sort of surrounding you, wonder if you're going to make it. Or to be caught in a fire or something and just barely escape. Well, these things are going to be, in many cases, universal. Some of the problems he speaks of here, men's hearts failing them for fear, and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth, for the powers of heaven shall be shaken. And when God, of course this will be right at the very end, he's going to intervene and shake this earth and it's going to stagger to and fro like a drunk man, he says. Now, how many people do you think can still stand under, I don't fear anything, I don't fear God or man, when God begins to really exert a little bit of His power? At that time, I would like to make sure I've already been on God's side a long time, and that power will never work against me, but for me. But that's what I have to think about today. So that when the time comes, I'm on the right side, and that power is to support me and not to break me. Because I've already repented and have a broken spirit and a broken, contrite heart. And then God will use that power to protect and help, rather than beat down until the person finally comes to a realization, I haven't taken you seriously. I haven't really respected you like I ought to. I haven't really looked forward to your kingdom. And of course, some won't even go that far. They'll just go ahead and give up. Well, I hope that's not the case. Let's turn back to Ezekiel 5 and see what lies ahead for Americans, for Canadians, for South Africans, Australians, and Britons in the very near future. In Ezekiel, the 5th chapter, commencing in verse 5, here's a prophecy that is coming to pass in just a very few years, if even a few years, maybe even a year and a half or 2 or 3 years. It could be that soon. Commencing in verse 5, Ezekiel 5, we read, Thus saith the eternal God, This is Jerusalem, I have set it in the midst of the nations. Jerusalem is a type and a symbol of all Israel, and more particularly in this prophecy of Joseph's descendants, the United States and British Commonwealth. I have set it in the midst of the nations and countries that are round about her, and she has changed my judgments into wickedness, more than the nations. You know, nations have followed Buddha and religions like that, and they've never altered, they never changed their gods, but Israelites, and more particularly the Josephites, who send out more Bibles than any other country, any other peoples who've ever lived, they're the ones that have changed from the true God to the false God. They've changed from the Sabbath to Sunday, from the Feast of Tabernacles to Christmas, etc., etc., etc. That's what he's talking about. She has changed my judgments unto wickedness more than the nations, and my statutes more than the countries that are round about her. For they have refused my judgments, and my statutes they have not walked in them. Therefore, thus saith the eternal God, because you multiplied more than the nations, and the crime rate in God's people, Joseph, is far above other nations. Do you know that? And right up here in Dallas, Texas, I think Dallas is about the second most crime-ridden city in the whole United States. I don't know whether it's before or after Houston, but Houston has more crime-related activities or whatever than even New York City. Violent crimes. Right down in Houston, and I heard on the news yesterday that Dallas is right up there about second in the nation. So Houston and Dallas are both just filled with crime. And they're right in the heart, well, not in the heart, but they're in Texas. And you'd think, they ought to know better. But we don't, do we? Therefore, thus saith the eternal God, because you've multiplied more than the nations that are round about you, and have not walked in my statutes, neither have you kept my judgments, neither have you done according to the judgments of the nations that are round about. In other words, other nations at least have adhered to the gods that they have believed in for generations. But here the Israelites were shown the true God, given His statutes, His judgments, His laws, and they changed it all. So He says, you've done worse than the heathen about you. They've never had the chance of knowing me like you have. And they just keep holding to old Buddha or to Mohammed or whatever. And they don't change. But the ones who were called to the living God, they're the ones that have changed. Verse 8, he says, Therefore, thus saith the eternal God, Behold, even I, even I, am against you, and will execute judgments in the midst of thee in the sight of the nations. You know, when God lets the United States of Europe attack and destroy the United States, Britain and Canada in one night, one day, you know that God says the nations are going to be astonished. It's almost going to be unbelievable, but that such a mighty power could fall in one day. But He says they're going to clap their hands when they see it. Because we're not loved, we're hated by nations. And they only pretend so long as they feel they can get something from us. And if they can be promised a little bit more from someone else like the Cubans were, they show what their true color is. Hatred. And so the nations are going to absolutely rejoice and clap their hands at the downfall of the United States and Britain, mainly the United States, which is the power today. And I will do in thee that which I have not done. And whereunto I will not do any more the like. Now, anyone ought to be able to put two and two together and get four out of this. Daniel speaks a time of trouble that's unlike any that's ever happened. He said there will never be another time of trouble before or after like it is. Jesus Christ spoke of the great tribulation, said there will never come another time that will parallel it. It's going to be a time unlike any other time. So he's talking about the same time here. He says, and I will do in thee that which I have not done, and whereunto I will not do any more, the like, because of all of your abominations. The great tribulation is coming because he says that his people, Israel, and more particularly the Josephites, have committed abominations to a degree that God's finally going to have to intervene and punish. Now, Mr. Armstrong and Ted realize this, and they realize their responsibilities to finally get the message and the warning before the leadership of these nations. And they know there's an obligation. God says, you don't warn them, I'm going to hold you accountable. So that hangs over their head. That's why an 84-year-old man keeps plugging away. That's why Garner Ted has become so busily involved in this work in the more recent years, because he knows that's his responsibility. And I'll get to a number of points a little bit later here that just occurred. He says, therefore the Father shall eat the sons in the midst of thee. Now, of course, people say, oh, we Americans would never do anything like that. Why, the Canadians would never commit cannibalism. You know why a person would say that? Because we've always been fed and fat. We've never realized what the human mind can do when it's on the verge of starvation. That men really will turn to cannibalism. And some of the prophecies show that the most delicate woman among the Israelites will eat her own offspring, and will actually hide her own offspring from her husband or other children because she so desires it. And it speaks of even more horrible things. But most people, oh, that wouldn't happen. That's why God says, I'm going to show you people that it's going to happen. And he says, you'd better be watching and praying always because these things are going to happen. And when I see the conduct of some people, I realize they don't believe that. And they don't put God first and fear Him above all things and realize this is going to come to pass. Oh, God, have mercy. Help me that I might help in your work, that I might be accounted worthy to escape these things, because I know they're going to come. I know you're not a liar. I know you haven't created a funny book and some fictitious novel. This is your word, which cannot be broken. The Father shall eat the sons in the midst of thee. That's how depraved and low Americans are going to come in the very near future. It's going to get bad. And the sons shall eat their fathers. That's what God said. He knows. He's not going to talk to some welfare agent and to get confirmation before he can believe what he's written. He's going to show a lot of people that the do-gooders, just how base humanity is, and especially under the sway of Satan the devil, the enemy of God, and how very low we can stoop to do things you wouldn't even begin to imagine. But when you're faced with horrifying circumstances, and more particularly when you're starving to death, it's amazing what you'll do. Have you ever read anything about the Donner Pass in California, where they ran out of food? The Indians got their cattle, and they were up freezing to death in the mountains of central California, and they began to eat one another. So it's happened already, and there are a lot of documented examples about what has happened when people began to starve to death. That's why they call it the Donner Pass. That's where all except 2 or 3 that finally got through perished, of a whole group that was pioneering out into California and got caught in the snow and blizzards up in the Sierra Mountains there in central California. So it's happened, and it will happen. When they besieged Jerusalem back in 70 A.D., they said even the princes turned to eating their own offspring. I mean, the ones that were supposed to be the most elite, and educated so far, removed so far from ever doing that. And Josephus records what people did when Jerusalem was besieged, and they ran out of food, and people began to starve to death. And you could say, well, let's not think about this. Well, I'd rather think about an escape than to experience it in a real sense. So it's not going to go away because we hide our eyes. God said, we can say, let's go out and get a great big pile of sand. Let's all stick our heads into it. Maybe it won't happen. Poppycock, it will. And I will execute judgments in you And the whole remnant of you will I scatter into all the winds. Wherefore, as I live, says the eternal God, surely because you have defiled my sanctuary with all of your detestable things, and some of the things we're doing, we're legalizing homosexuality and gay boys, and God says, even if you're an effeminate, you won't make the kingdom of God. He says, if you're a man, you'd better ask for male hormones. And if you're a woman, you'd better ask for female hormones and be what you were born to be, and don't shake your fist at me and say, why have you made me thus and thus? I want to be something different. So God says, even an effeminate, back in Corinthians, will not make the kingdom of God. Then how much more will a homosexual not make it? And we are absolutely just flaunting God and saying, well, we're not going to just allow it, we're going to recognize it and say, well, they're good citizens. Well, that's not the way God looks at it. And with all of your abominations, therefore, will also diminish you, neither shall mine eye spare, neither will I have any more pity. A third part of you shall die with the pestilence. That's disease epidemics. And in the vernacular, we could say, we ain't seen nothing yet. And man is absolutely bringing upon himself the conditions for mass disease epidemics to sweep the country. First of all, by our wretched diet, and by our style of life, and then by all these inoculations they're going to finally, mess up, and just, they're really pressing now to inoculate all the children, whether little babies or not, with everything. I mean, poke them with everything. Guarantee nothing can happen. They go out and live any way they want to. And they'll never have mumps, measles, typhoid, tetanus, meningitis, etc., etc. They think they, just do any old way. And God, you can't bring anything on us. He says a third are going to die from disease epidemics, and with famine shall they be consumed in the midst of you. And a third part of you shall fall by the sword. That's when the United States of Europe attacks. By the time it attacks, a third will have died from racial violence, from famine, disease epidemics. And I will scatter a third into all the winds, and I will draw out a sword after them. So even that one third, many of them will perish in tribulation. Well, I'm just giving you a little, refresher on why God says, watch and pray always. That you be accounted worthy to escape these things, because when they come, there's no way except by God that you can escape. And there's no arguing with God then. A lot of people could say, Mr. Armstrong today, why, Mr. Armstrong, you're a fool. You say we're actually going to go into captivity and our peoples are going to end up in Europe? United States of Europe headed by the Germans? Ha, 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 ha. But it's going to be a different story when they're over there and a jackbooted Nazi is sticking his boot down their throat. Then I don't think they're going to say Mr. Armstrong was foolish. And there will be some senators and congressmen among that group. Mr. Armstrong will finally be before the Congress. And Mr. Ted Armstrong's already been there just recently visiting with President Sadat. If you've gotten your latest worldwide news, there's a little article on that by Ted. In other words, God is gradually working Mr. Armstrong around the world, and he's going to have so much support of world leaders that finally the President and the Congress will have to recognize him. And he's getting Garner Ted well known where they're having to recognize him. And don't think when Vice President Mandel and others were at the dinner that the State Department, the CIA, and everyone else doesn't know everything that's going on. And they know that much more about Garner Ted. They've had to know a lot about Mr. Armstrong over the years because they've seen Joseph Strauss come over. They've seen King Leopold and others make special trips and even violate protocol, so to speak, to visit him when they didn't even come through the State Department. So they know all of his movements. Every move Mr. Armstrong has made in international circles, the government is aware of it. They're just not willing to acknowledge him yet. But finally, the force of circumstances are going to bring it about. Then he'll tell them what's going to happen. And he can tell it the way it is. And when his jaws begin to bounce before the Congress, and they see this old white-haired man of 85 or 86 or 87, however his age will be at the time, those words are going to penetrate. They won't believe them, but later they're going to realize the man knew what he was talking about. So that's the immediate future. It's not much of a future, is it? Apart from God. Now, what does God promise to do out of it all? In Isaiah 61 is a beautiful area of prophecy that shows why the message we have to proclaim is good news. Of course, there is the warning, but that's only temporary. It's going to be short-lived. But what the essence of the message is the future for all of mankind. And not only all of mankind, when he becomes God, for all eternity. So here in Isaiah 61, let's read a little about what Christ is looking forward to doing. The Spirit of the eternal God is upon me, because the Eternal has anointed me to preach the good tidings unto the meek. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted. Now, all of you probably know people that are brokenhearted over various things, and they're not nearly as brokenhearted now as they're going to be when everything is taken. When their homes, you can drive over here, especially in certain parts of West End, you see great big $100,000 homes with these beautiful yards, and a man can go ahead and have maybe $1,000 job, bringing in the grass and having maybe a crew of 10 or more. Work 2 or 3 days. When you begin to analyze, those men don't work for nothing. And they're paying those men from $20 to $30 a piece per day at least. And they have 10 or more working their lawn. It takes 2 or 3 days to put all the grass down. You can imagine what they invest just in their lawns. There's a new house been built just down Parkway and just across the little lake down here, right on the corner. It's a stucco-type home, and that's the home built by the manager of the General Telephone Company. I've forgotten his name. But I imagine he has invested probably $2,000 or $3,000 just in his yard, or more. Now, can you think about those people losing all that? Those are nice things, and if you possess them the right way, and the whole nation were going the right way, it would be good to have that, and even give something better to your children and grandchildren. But when people become accustomed to that style of life, they have a Seville, and maybe a Mercedes and various other cars, and they have a big bank account, they're members of the country club, they're members of various fraternities or sororities, and on, it's not going to be easy to give that up. That's why God's going to have to take it, because people would not give it up of themselves. Then when they see the whole country collapse, the economy and society go, and they see about 2/3 of their fellow man, and I'm talking about those who finally survive, is the remaining 1/3, and they go into captivity, it's going to be hard. And if they didn't see something that gave them hope in the world tomorrow, something beyond, being reduced down to where they didn't even have a change of clothing. You could probably go into some of these homes and find 50 or 100 suits in various changes. Not even a change of clothing. And God says they won't even have enough food and enough water to drink. They will just barely keep them alive as slave labor in Europe. Then they're going to begin to think very seriously about what they've heard. Then they're going to be mighty thankful they heard a message, and are finally convinced of that message that there is a world to come. That there is a God in heaven who's going to send Jesus Christ back to do these things. To bind up the brokenhearted. And don't think they're not going to be brokenhearted. God says their nerves are going to so go on, and that when they hear a leaf being blown across the ground, they're going to be in fear. And in the morning they're going to say, I wish it were night. At night they're going to say, I wish it were morning. I wish there was some way that all this tribulation were over so I could finally begin to experience the good things that I know are coming. Help me to hang on. There'll be people in the tribulation who will just be dying to hang on. Because they will want to help pioneer in the world tomorrow a right way. They'll finally come to realize how wrong man has been, and how right he can be, and how he can be taught to use good things properly. Americans have had a lot because God's going to let them repent of the wrong use, and then He's going to bless them with a lot more, just like Job's case. And they're going to have a lot more than they ever had. But when they possess it in the world tomorrow, they're going to possess it rightly. And they're going to attract other nations to want to possess good things in the same way. So Christ is going to come back to mend the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives. They're going to need liberty. The Bible says they're going to be in a state of death in the wilderness when the trumpet is blown in Christ's second coming. You're going to have to free the Israelites from complete annihilation in Europe, because I think it's in Isaiah 27 where he says they're ready to perish. Those that are in the wilderness are ready to perish when the trumpet is blown. So he's going to have to intervene to prevent that remaining remnant from being devoured themselves. So they're going to be thankful to be set at liberty, and to the opening of the prison to them that are bound. There probably are a lot of individuals in prison that say to themselves, I wish I'd had it all over to do over again. I just wish I hadn't made those mistakes, and I just wish that somehow I could relive my life. Or I could just be freed and go out and not make those mistakes again. Well, he's going to free everyone from prison. Then in the world tomorrow, he's going to say, okay, either you walk in my way, or there won't be any prison, I'll just annihilate you. But I think most of them are going to tiptoe around and say, well, this freedom is good. I'm glad you've given it to me. Please help me to walk in it. Help me to qualify to become a member of this way of life, to become a member of the family that believes in this way of life, to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord. Well, that's where actually when Christ quoted this back in the Gospels, he only quoted up to here. Then he said, and the day of the vengeance of our God. In other words, that's what we're proclaiming, that God is going to take vengeance, He's going to intervene, and He's going to begin to punish nations until they wake up, repent, turn to Him, and finally are willing to let Him show them the course of life that leads to good results. That's where we are right today, on the day of vengeance of our God. And then He's going to intervene after all this and comfort all that mourn. And of course He's going to mend the brokenhearted, proclaim liberty to the captives. That was His message. That when Christ here, He said, I'm going to do this eventually. I'm going to establish a kingdom. I'm going to set the world free. Then the world didn't believe it. The world hasn't tried to conform to that, so He says, okay, I'm going to proclaim a warning message. And I'm going to bring you to where you will want me to do this. That's what we're doing. So we have to proclaim the overall good news. We also say, since you haven't believed in it, since man hasn't believed in this message for over 1900 years since it was delivered, our God is now going to punish. So we're to proclaim the day of God's vengeance. Then Christ is going to intervene to comfort all that mourn, and that's what they're going to do. There's going to be a lot of Americans, people from San Angelo, that will finally survive through the tribulation. And they will be in mourning, and they'll just be yearning for Christ to intervene, set them free, deliver them to the land of Palestine, and begin to use them by rebuilding them into a right society to set an example to other Israelites and finally to the rest of the world. To appoint unto them that mourn in Zion, to give unto them beauty for ashes. Now I'd say that's a pretty good promise from a great God. He says, I'm going to give you beauty instead of ashes. I'm going to take you out of these ashes that you people have brought on yourself. This result, I'm going to turn it into beauty. The oil of joy for mourning. So He's going to take those that are mourning at that time, really repent, He's going to give them joy. It's not such a bad message, is it? God could say, I'm just going to annihilate all of you and do away with it, and it'll be it. He says, no, I'm going to change the course of life. I'm going to set you free. I'm going to mend the brokenhearted. I'm going to free those that are captives. I'm going to release all those in prison. And then I'm going to make sure they learn the lesson, of course. I'm going to give you beauty for ashes, joy for mourning, the garment of praise for the spirit of heaviness. Well, I'd say that's kind of a positive promise God's making, that they might be called trees of righteousness. Or anything but today. The planning of the eternal, that He might be glorified. You know, God says that, children ought to be like olive trees around the table of the parents. Really producing fruit and really, a part of the family. Instead of like most children in this age, like garbage cans rolling down Main Street. Instead of being olive trees, around the table, they're more like rumbling, roaring garbage cans rolling down Main Street, smoking pot and sniffing glue and conduct themselves in all kinds of wrong ways that are hurting them, their parents, and everyone else. Verse 4, and they shall build the old wastes. They shall raise up the former desolations, and they shall repair the waste cities, the desolations of many generations. Some of them have, and some haven't. You can go to many places. You can find old burned-out cities or old run-down cities that have been vacated. They're going to be rebuilt. And then, of course, there are going to be a lot of them as a result of the coming tribulation. They're going to be absolutely devastated. So it's quite a rebuilding program in the future that's got to take place. And strangers shall stand and feed your flocks. They're finally going to respect the Israelites to such a degree that they're going to want to help out, to help promote the progress that they know will extend out to their countries. When they'll be volunteering in that day and time, not to cut our throats, but to help the Israelites. And the sons of the alien shall be your plowmen and your vine dressers, but you shall be named the priests of the eternal. Can you imagine Americans and Britons that God says, you're going to be my priest, you're going to go out here and you're going to represent me? The people that are cursing, you go into, a service station or whatever, and you find slipshod type individual taking God's name in vain. He says, eventually you're going to be my priest for me and minister. So he has to bring about quite a change in their lives. So instead of spewing out cursings and rantings and ravings, they're going to be speaking the truth. That's what Americans and Britons and Canadians are going to be in the very near future. And they shall call you ministers of our God. You shall eat the riches of the Gentiles. So the Gentiles are finally going to respect Israel because they have the God of Israel behind them. They're going to actually support them and send wealth up to Palestine to help the Israelites. And then, of course, the Israelites are going to use that in a selfish manner. They're going to use that to build up so they can help set an example that comes right back to the Gentiles. And God says it's more blessed to give than to receive. You know, the Gentiles are finally going to realize we want to receive a lot of that, so we better give so we can get more. For shame you shall have double, and for confusion they shall rejoice in their portion. Therefore in the land they shall possess the double. Everlasting joy shall be unto them. In fact, I think that sermonette kind of ties in here. Just like God let things happen to Job to wake him up and then blessed him double, He's going to let things happen to God's people Israel. And wake them up. When they finally wake up, He says, I'm going to give you double anything you've ever had. Can you imagine Americans having double of what we've had today? If we would have used all of our wealth to build up the country, we could have such a plateau of living, such a high standard of living. In other words, just fine home we're talking about over here would be a commoner's home instead of the general manners of a big telephone company. The standard of living could be so high because of the wealth we Americans have had, but we've used most of it to feed defense. And we've given most of it away to nations, or a lot of it away to nations, that has not brought back a return. It's only weakened us. And I saw a little bit of this movie the other night, you know, the Pueblo. Makes you realize what a weak-kneed jellyfish of a nation we've become. You know what they should have done, all these generals and admirals crawfishing out of, going in there and rescuing the Pueblo? They'd been back in Teddy Roosevelt's day, I'll guarantee you. He'd have sent one message out, if you don't release the Pueblo, the next message I send is going to be to my Air Force and Navy, and they're going to blast you Koreans completely off of the face of the earth. Boy, you'd seen the Pueblo coming back. I mean, they've been behind it, swimming, pushing it. You see, we don't know how to use our power for good. Of course, that wouldn't be for good because man's still going the wrong direction, but at least we would still command some respect. The Germans were steaming toward Manila Bay one time. Teddy Roosevelt sent them a message, and he says, now, you'd better turn that battleship around because the next message I send is going to be to my fleet. They knew he meant business. They turned around. Why, if I heard Mr. Carter say that day, they'd say, hogwash, we're going to keep steaming. They wouldn't believe him. So the nation has really gone, more to pot than we have been in the past. At least men had backbones a few years ago. Today we don't have real backbones. We try to deal with Gentiles. We try to reason with them. They're unreasonable. God says the Gentile nations, and to varying degrees, have minds of wild animals. And He says you can't deal with that type mind, but we've never learned the lesson. Germans have attacked us twice, and we think we've converted them. And God says there's no way you can change the spots of a leopard. There's no way you can change the skin of an Ethiopian. In other words, there's no way you can change human nature. And He says those Germans have it in their heart to make war. But we don't believe that. We think, they're civilized today. And we're civilized. Yeah, the crime rate shows it. We've really become, you ever notice how civilized we've become since World War II? No crime in the country. Children are absolutely loyal and obedient. Husbands all love their wives, wives all love their husbands, neighbors all love the neighbor, states love states. And the whole United States is full of goodness and mercy and self-control. Surely is, isn't it? Well, they're finally coming to where they'll want God's way. So for their land they shall possess the double. Everlasting joy shall be unto them. Not joy that lasts through the night, but everlasting joy. For I, the Eternal, love judgment. I hate robbery for burnt offering. I don't know how many Americans really are robbing one another. A lot of them going down to church, usually on Sunday morning. Bless God! Bless the Lord! And they go out and rob some more. Oh, they don't call it robbery. It's just white-collar survival. Or whatever, I know we all can reason. I used to work out at the country club as an assistant pro way back when after I got out of World War II. You thought I was going to say one, didn't you? And I don't know how you can reason. I was running the pro shop, and I'd say, well, it's not going to hurt the pro out here, you know. And the golf course might take a few candy bars and a golf ball or two, you know. I mean, everyone kind of, that's just the way the white, blue collar, whatever collar, or no collar, even those that turn their collar around backwards. You begin to reason, well, I deserve it. Down in Australia, when I was managing the office there, we were losing about 10% of all the mail sent into the work because there's so many thieves in the postal department. They caught thieves. I dealt with the postal inspectors down at the GPO in Sydney on endless hours. We had all kinds of plants. We caught men in the, I didn't directly, but the inspectors did. We caught even the custodian in the North Sydney post office taking our mail, going down, opening up, and burning it in the incinerator at night. We had to mark bills. We had to mark letters. They'd catch them. But for every one they caught, about 10 more would come on the scene. We had to, you know, pick up our whatever receipts we could get in local congregations and bring them down. We didn't have that many congregations, so I didn't go to Brisbane. I'd pick up the mail. And you know what the Australians' attitude is? Well, I've lost at the races. They're real, you know, bettors at the races. They're real gamblers. They have lotteries and gambling. They bet on dogs. They bet on horses. So the Australians' basic attitude is, since I've lost all my money, and I don't want my family to go hungry, and they shouldn't go, it's right for me to go out and take whatever I need to take for the sake of my family. They never think about, what if you repent and don't gamble? And then your family would have something. But their attitude is, if I need it, and through any means that I use to get it, it's justified. And with that kind of an attitude, there's no way to stamp out thievery in the post office. We probably still, in spite of all of our controls and everything, probably still lose at least 5% of all the money directed to the work in Australia. They're a nation of thieves. Canada is one of the very unreliable nation. Their word doesn't mean much, just like Australians. I just get so disgusted down there. I was dealing with Mr. Ferner in a furniture manufacturing place. And he promised me the moon but couldn't deliver anything. You know, every time I told him, oh boy, we're about to get that out right now. But he'd always have an excuse, well, this happened. One time I told him, he said, well, the varnisher was sick, and that's why we're delayed. I called him up a couple of weeks later, and the carpenter was sick. See, he kind of got his employees kind of reversed. So, you know, they just lie right to your face. Promise you everything, and your first impression, these Australians will do anything for you. Then you finally realize do anything to you. Going through Canada, I have gone so far as to have a local elder, someone in a church area on my itinerary, maybe a city or over in another state, that I wanted a motel in. So he would go out. This happened. He went out and paid in advance from a motel room. Got the key. Told them I might be in wee hours of the morning. I drive in at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. I think it was Brandon up in I don't know whether that's Saskatchewan or Manitoba. I think it's in Manitoba. I come in about 1:30 in the morning, dead tired. I go in and say, I'm here to sign in for my room. He said, you don't have any room here. We don't have any rooms left. I said, well, I've got the key. I've got the receipt. You've got a room. No, we don't have any room. Well, it's room so-and-so. Well, that's been booked. The person been asleep over there 2 hours. I can't go over and wake them up. Well, my friend came over, gave you the money. Here's the receipt, and here's the key. He says, well, I don't know. See, I'm not the clerk that took that. That's the way they'll always do you. So I got into Winnipeg, and I knew I was going on east, and I wanted to make sure of a Holiday Inn booking on out to about 350 miles east of Winnipeg. So I had Mr. White call. I had Mr. Owen, Murphy call. And there were 3 long-distance calls, plus an assistant up there that called at different times to say, Gerald Waterhouse will be in a certain time. Do not. This was just 2 nights after I'd already had to sleep in the car all night because I couldn't get a motel over in Brendan. He's going to be in, so be sure and hold his room. I left Winnipeg about 10 or 11 o'clock, and I drove 350 miles. Got in about 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. I was dead tired. Went in, no room. Booked out from under me, guaranteed. I had that happen up there. I never had that happen that much in the United States, and I booked 100 more motels in the United States than Canada. So there's a lot of places. You'd think Canada's just filled with a lot of honest, dedicated people who would never mistreat you. Just go up there and try to book in several motels. And you'll see how many of them will renege and justify themselves because there's always the other person, not just now Holiday Inn, a oval-shaped, cylindrical type building. Tall one, must have been about 10 stories high, Holiday Inn. And I go in, finally found it. I couldn't even find the clerk. Finally I saw the lift, showing the elevator was coming down, and stepped out, and he's eating ice cream, big, heavy-set fellow. And he said, anything you want? I said, yeah, I want to book into my room. These rooms? I said, we don't have any rooms here. They're all booked. I said, well, you've got to have a room because we've made 3 long-distance calls to make sure this room was held until the early hours of the morning. Well, I don't know. I don't know anything about it. It must have been one of the other clerks. We don't have any rooms. That's when you pray, help me to love my enemies. No, it's a pretty sad old world, the way people do one another, and the lack of really backing up their word. And one thing that is really outstanding about God's character is He backs up His word. He never lies. And your word is the strength of your character. And it's better not to promise than to promise and not fulfill your word. It's better to be a little more reserved than, well, I'm just not sure I can do that. And say, well, yeah, sure, I'll do it. 2 weeks after, it should have been done. Well, I just forgot all about it. Told a fellow working with me down in Sydney one time. I said, why don't you tie a string around your finger? To be sure you're reminded. I said, are you too proud? What I have to do, when I tell you to do something, I have to look ahead a week or 2 in my diary, and I have to say, check Frank. I said, it's double work. It'd be easy for me to go ahead and do the work because I'm not sure you'll do it. And I have to always double check you. Said, I'm not so proud that I won't make notes to remind myself to make sure I do it. Now, don't be so vain that you think that's, a step down to have to write a note, because you don't carry through. When you have someone like that, you'd almost be better off without him or her. A person's word has got to be genuine. And when you promise, fulfill it if at all possible. And be very careful about what comes out of your mouth. Because you see, your word is one of the great aspects, or the lack of it, of your character. An unreliable person just doesn't have character. And I guess the strength of one's character is reliability, which God is. Then he goes on, he says here in verse 9 of 61, Isaiah 61, and their seed shall be known among the Gentiles. How would you like to know that your children and grandchildren are known among Gentile nations? That they set such an example in Israel? That they're such outstanding people in Israel? Of course, by the time of the 3rd and 4th generation, your children will already be spirit beings, your grandchildren probably. But to have that kind of respect among the Gentiles, I doubt if any of you today are known by the Gentiles. But in the world tomorrow, it says, our seed will be known by the Gentiles because they're going to be the pioneers in the world tomorrow. They're going to be the leaders in the world tomorrow, right under our supervision. And when they're sent out to help institute something from Jerusalem or from Palestine and other countries, they're going to be treated as, well, these people are from headquarters. These people are from Jerusalem. These people are from Israel. If they're not right directly in Jerusalem, but they're from Israel. They're representatives. They've come out here to show us the way. They're God's priests and His ministers to show us how we conduct ourselves in this particular way. And their seed shall be known among the Gentiles. The average teenager would rather smoke pot than to look in the future and say, I would prefer to be in that honorable position that guarantees my future and help many others because they're going to know me. Most people don't see beyond the end of the marijuana or Mary Jane or whatever. Just a matter of eat, drink, and smoke the pot for tomorrow you die. That's their basic philosophy. Instead of realizing there is a God that can guarantee a future and I want to be a part of that. I want to be an honorable person and finally a member of the family of God and live forever rather than wreck or hurt my future. All that see them shall acknowledge them. Well, that's going to be quite a position of honor, isn't it? All that see them will acknowledge. Well, these people are the offspring of members of the family of God. They know the way by which we ought to live. They know how to show us. They know how to teach us. They know how to instruct us. They can outdo us in anything. They're leaders. We can admire and respect them, look up to them. All that see them shall acknowledge them that they are the seed which the Eternal has blessed. That's speaking of a lot of our young people throughout the United States that finally survive and become leaders in the world tomorrow. Then just the latter part of verse 11, it says, So the eternal God will cause righteousness and praise to spring forth before all the nations. Finally, the Chinese people, the Mongolians, the Pakistanians, the Africans, the Central and South Americans are going to begin to praise God when they see the example of Americans and Canadians and Britain finding in the land of Palestine with a completely new way of life, living that way of life, being blessed for it, and producing things for the good of the whole world. And everything they produce is worthwhile. No cheap, slipshod work being done. No overproduction in something that's not needed, or no underproduction. A perfect economy and a perfect society and a perfect way of life emanating from the Israelites in Palestine to influence the response and the cooperation of Gentiles. That's what lies ahead. But there are, some terrible times lying just before the tribulation. There's no way by which these Israelites can ever begin to fulfill this except for this message we're getting out. Now, you see, they're going to have to come to such a low state. Most of them will perish to finally get them weaned away from, completely broken of the way in which they've been going. And to stop them or lead them where they're no longer trusting in their own governments, their own societies, their own economies. So if we didn't get the message out today, so when they go into captivity, they have something to hope in, this change can never be brought about. See, God is very concerned about making a pivot from this world to the world tomorrow. And He is very concerned about this work because this is the work by way of which He brings about the pivot from this world, the way of Satan the devil, to His world to come, the way of God. And He's going to do it through the Josephites being the leaders. So, have no reservations about the fact that Mr. Armstrong and Ted will finally be right before the President, the Senate, and the Congress in the United States and Canada and Britain and Australia and South Africa and let them know this is your only way out. You see, you are headed into a national captivity. This is going to be a worldwide time of trouble. You won't believe me now, but you'll believe me when you're in that trouble, and you will thank God you heard the message that there is hope on beyond so you can hang on once you're there. And all other hope in your governments, hope in your own economies, hope in your own societies, hope in your own way, when all of that fails, you would have nothing else in which to hope except as you have learned about God and His coming world through this message, the good news of the world tomorrow. So, God knows what has to happen. That's why He's raised this work up. Matthew 23, I want to show you what Christ understood would have to happen before the Israelites would turn to God. Verses 37 through 39 in Matthew 23. Christ said, O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you that kill the prophets and stone them which are sent unto you. See, that's the way the Israelites have always reacted. Every time God sent a prophet or a messenger, they denied the message. They stoned and did away with the servant. That's why God has to let them come to where they're almost all dead. And He breaks them of their trust in their own way, their dependence on their own governments, their own systems, their own ways of life. He said, every time, Jerusalem, and Jerusalem stands for all Israel, really, in a broad sense. O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you that kill the prophets and stonest them which are sent unto you, how often would I have gathered your children together, even as a hen gathers her chickens under her wings, and you would not. Christ knew exactly what the Israelites would have to experience before they'd be willing to come under His supervision. So they would come to Him like little chicklets, little chickens. You ever notice how, mother hen can have those chickens? She can, say the right chicken word, and how they all come to her, and she gathers them under. Well, Christ said eventually the Israelites are going to come to Him just like that. And they're going to depend on Him and look to Him just like the little chickens do the mother hen. But He said something has to happen before you come to that. So verse 39 says, Behold, your house is left unto you desolate. The tribulation. He said the only thing that will bring you to this place where you're willing to come to me like little chickens come to the mother hen is the tribulation. I'm going to break the precedent here and drink a little of this juice. Tastes like it's got big bitter gin in it. Well, it really doesn't. Chase that orange juice down a little water. So Christ knew, he said, now before you finally come to where you want this relationship, your house is going to be left unto you desolate. That means the house, the United States, Canada, Britain, Australia, and South Africa, and then later the Israelites of Western Europe. Their countries are going to have to be made absolutely desolate. Especially the Josephites, before they're going to be willing to turn to God. Then he said in verse 39, after the tribulation, he says, for I say unto you, you shall not see me henceforth. Now when are they going to see him again? In his second coming. You will not see me henceforth till you say, blessed is he that comes in the name of the Eternal. That means Americans, Canadians, Britons, and Australians are going to finally say, blessed be Jesus Christ who comes in the name of his Father to set up a government to free us from captivity, restore us to the land of our forefathers, re-educate us, and make us a light shining out to the Gentiles. So Christ knew the order. He knew at the end of the age, a message would have to go out and let them know what's going to happen. Then the tribulation will make believers out of them. Then they're going to turn and say, please. They're going to be praying for God's kingdom to come a lot more than you and I are today. Because they're going to realize it's a matter of survival. And they're going to be praying, please, God, send Christ back and free us from slavery. And restore us under your supervision and care, or to it, and help us to help others finally see your way so all nations on this earth can work together for the good of all concerned rather than cutting one another's throats as we've been doing for so many generations. So Christ, in response to this, showing what would have to happen to bring about this desolation, his disciples came to him in verse 3 of 24 and said, tell us, when shall these things be, and what shall be the sign of your coming and of the end of the world? In other words, he was talking about the end of the age here when he says your house is left unto you desolate. Then he's going to intervene at a time when the Israelites are willing to really turn to him and look to him and respect him and follow him. So his disciples said, tell us, now when are all these things going to happen? What's going to be the sign of your coming and of the end of the world? So in verse 14 it says, and this gospel of the kingdom, the good news of the kingdom of God, the government of God, shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations. Not to convert the nations, but as a witness. The way by which God's going to begin to convert the nations is by tribulation. He's going to take everything they've got away from them, pare them down to a small number, refine them through the tribulation, that is, the Josephites, and those that come through the tribulation are going to want his leadership, his government, his supervision, his way of life, and they're going to, as he said here, come to him like a little chickens do the mother hen. Now when this gospel is preached in all the world for a witness, he says, and then shall the end come, the end of man's way. The end of man's way, first of all, among the Josephites, and then among the rest of the Israelites, and then from Gentile nation to Gentile nations, finally that end of their way will come, and the turning to God's way, the introduction and development of that way down into the world tomorrow. So, God knows what has to happen. That's why he has Mr. Armstrong and Ted, and placing them before the leadership of the countries, and more particular now before the U.S. government. Just a heading here over this article, the personal from Mr. Ted Armstrong. It says, Governor Ted Armstrong was invited to an April 5th dinner in Washington, D.C., given by the Egyptian embassy. At the meal were Egypt's President Anwar Sadat, U.S. Vice President Walter Mondale, and other notables. For details, see Mr. Armstrong's article, or personal. So you'll read in there. And there are all sorts of comments about Mr. Armstrong's itinerary on his recent trip into Africa. Here he's talking before the king and other notables in Swaziland. And then over in the last page, it shows Mr. Armstrong before some prominent South Africans, and over in the new country that's emerging in Southwest Africa. So God is placing Mr. Armstrong especially before many heads of state. I guess he's visited up to this time somewhere in the neighborhood of 130 to 150 heads of state. And of course our government notes that. And finally the pressure on the international scene is going to force recognition of the man. And in one way or the other, God will get Mr. Armstrong before the President and before the Congress. And when he comes here, he's not going to pat them back and say, you men are fine men, you're Christians, you even have all your teeth, everything's going to work out fine, I think you're going to rescue the nation. I think we're going to bring about friendship among all the other nations. We're going to work out non-aggression pacts with the Russians and the rest of the world. We're going to finally cooperate, and we're going to do what Christ only can do, but we're going to do it. Then when Christ comes, we're going to say, boys, thanks for doing it. I was a little bit afraid that I wasn't going to be able to do it. And you are fantastic. You ought to be worshipped rather than me, because look what you've done. A lot of men, you see, would want to do what only Christ can do so they can get the honor and the glory. If President Carter could really do what he wants to do, he'd become a little god. And he'd want the rest of the world to know it. I've been able to do something no other president or leader has been able to do. That'd really be a humble, confession, wouldn't it? I've done something no one else has ever been able to do in the history of the world. Well, he won't do it. No one else will. It's going to take Christ with His power and His understanding and His backing by His Father in heaven to do what men would like to do. Because men would like to get the credit rather than give it to God. Men lust for power. Men want to be God before they're qualified. Now, Mr. Carter would like to get Brazil and other nations concerned about civil rights. They don't want civil rights. If they were to give civil rights, they'd lose their positions. They want to hold on to those positions of power at all costs. And the best way to do that is keep the people as ignorant as you can, and as poverty-stricken as you can, and you amass the wealth of yourself, and you keep them in fear of you, so they fear to try to uproot you. That's what most leaders on this earth want. They want that power. Look how Mrs. Gandhi fought for it in India. Did everything possible to try to maintain her power position. Look at old idiot Amin. He slaughtered probably 1 million people over there to keep his position. He's not concerned about civil rights. He's concerned about the power he loves to exercise. Hitler was that way. Mussolini was that way. And just a lot of our leaders have been to a degree that way, although it's more of a tame matter. We just want power in a little bit more of a tame manner. But we still want it. So God's going to get the leaders of this church before them. Now, I have no doubt about that. And if people really believe that fully, I think most of you do. I hope you do. But then you can avoid letting little picky things get under your skin and bother you. And you can give them support and realize God is using those men, and He's going to use them until finally this whole world becomes aware of God, of Christ, of the world tomorrow, and the immediate problems the world is going to go into, the Great Tribulation. But out of it all is going to come a wonderful world tomorrow. That's what we should have our hearts set on. When Christ sets up that great government, resurrecting people like Abel, Enoch, Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Job. Job's going to be a great builder. He probably had the greatest genius of any man who's ever lived, maybe with the exception of Christ. Now, I say with the exception because Christ may not have had that tremendous talent just in that particular way. He was a broad individual, able to do just everything, so to speak. Maybe he didn't have that kind of ability for building to the same degree Job as a human being. But as a God being, there's no doubt about what he had. He built the universe. But anyway, that's not the issue there, but the fact is that Job was a great builder. He built the pyramid, the Great Pyramid. And men can't, to this day, figure out just how it was done. So Job got a, kind of an inflated concept of himself because he compared his building to what other people had done. What God wanted Job to come to realize is compare that with what I've done. And when he finally got Job to see that he was the builder of the whole universe, that he put the earth here, from which Job just took a few stones. Sure, it's a big job compared to men, but compared to God, he was only taking a little bit of the surface of what God put here. So finally God said, Job, if you're so great, answer me this. How did I start the earth? What did I start with? How did I hook the foundation? How did I put it here? If you're so wise, tell me, how did I start the earth? Did I hook it on something? How did I get this beginning over here? Then how did I put down layer after layer to finally build this earth? And when Job finally saw it in that light and realized he only took a little bit of a finished earth and put that into a building, that compared to God, he was nothing. So finally he repented. So when he comes up in the resurrection and Christ says, Job, here is the way my Father and I would have you do the building, he's going to say, yes, sir. He's not going to say, well, you don't have to tell me anything, I know it all. He only knew it all compared to other human beings, but compared to God, he knew very little. So it would be a very humble executive in the government of God carrying out God's programs in rebuilding the world, cities, suburbs, and so forth. Now, when you resurrect all these individuals, Moses, who was a great lawgiver, one that would really enforce God's law in a nation. You take a person like Joseph, who is going to develop tomorrow's economy, working through his own descendancy from Manasseh first. We're going to have quite an economy. We're going to have quite a vast building program, rebuilding cities, developing suburbs, raising up and developing, or I shouldn't say raising up, but developing engineering projects and so forth to build the world up in the right way. We're going to have quite an economy under Joseph's supervision. We're going to have quite a rule over nations, down from Christ down through Moses, Moses through David, David through the 12 apostles, Moses on out through Daniel, Daniel through Paul, and Paul through his assistants over the Gentiles. Can you think about the educational program of the world tomorrow? Elijah working down through Mr. Armstrong and all of us backing him up, raising up churches from Jerusalem until finally engulf the earth, encircle the earth, raising up educational programs, giving the world right entertainment. And the entertainment in the world tomorrow will come either directly from Jerusalem or under the auspices of Jerusalem. There will be no independents out here in Hollywood or Rome or Paris coming with their weird concepts of style or entertainment. It'll all come from Christ through His government. And when people begin to see and experience right entertainment and contrast that with what they thought was entertainment in this day and time, you're going to realize that was like a can full of garbage back there. When they see what Job's able to do by rebuilding the world, they're going to say, we knew very little, and we even misdirected the knowledge and the understanding and the opportunities we had. When they see someone like Noah getting the races in position where just the right peoples are adjacent to other peoples, where they can complement one another and they're right where they ought to be, to take advantage of the topography, the geography, and their natural talents and abilities, which that particular part of the earth provides them, so their talents and abilities can be best worked. And they begin to see what each racial group and each national group can contribute for the good of all concerned. They're finally going to begin to love the different races and different nationalities instead of hate them like they do today. And don't think we have been converted and all white Americans love all black Americans. And all black Americans love all white Americans. And all Chinese Americans love all other Americans. I was talking to Jim Chapman the other day down in Baton Rouge. He's the pastor of a church in New Orleans. He said they're ready for racial violence in New Orleans. You can see it in a lot of the cities. You can just go through and realize that there's a very defiant attitude among the blacks toward the whites. And a lot of people know that they would like to, they're amassing power by way of ammunition and so forth for an uprising. They feel it's got to come eventually. It's going to be a different story in the world tomorrow when races love one another and genuinely do. And they appreciate what God put in one as opposed to the other, so when they all put together, they reflect an overall whole that makes, this organizational structure with these different departmental groups or racial groups work for the good of all concerned, where God has just the right temper, the right balance among all peoples on the face of the earth. And they really love one another and genuinely respect and appreciate what each is able to do by way of contributing to the world scene. Now, when we're finally in Jerusalem with all the mechanics of education based on this Word, and from the headquarters church in Jerusalem spreading churches worldwide, finally the entire world will know God, will worship God on the Sabbath, be keeping His annual occasions, and they'll know the very purpose for their being on the earth. There won't be any Christmas, Easter, Halloween, All Fools' Day, All Saints' Day, Buddha's Day, Shinto's Day, Mohammed's Day, and all the other days. There'll just be the days of God. And the whole world will know them and finally have the opportunity, because we're going to make it available as members of that coming government. We're going to give them proper schools, grade schools, high schools, university schools, technical schools, trade schools, commercial schools, and on. So we can teach them not only how to live, but how to use their talents. So when people are assigned to work under Job or Joseph, whomever, we assign the individuals who have the talents which have been sharpened to do the particular job that individual is responsible for on the international scene. It'd be wonderful to be in charge of a society where everyone worships the same God, loves his neighbor, and where they're all in a balanced way of life, where they get a balance of entertainment, a balance of culture, a balance of social activities, family activities, athletic activities, and so forth. So they're all balanced individuals. No oddballs, no weirdos sneaking around looking, from around behind the barn. And when they're up, you might say at accountable age, on the university level, then spirit beings there to ascertain exactly what their future should hold by way of their job, the description is concerned. And then say, okay, you ought to remain in the educational program because we'd like to have you in imperial schools or you have to be raised up, or we'd like to keep you so we can add to the staff of the ambassador college program, or we'd like to keep you in the agricultural program to be a teacher of proper agricultural programs for this world. That's the world tomorrow. Or we would like to have you to and retain you in this technical school to be a teacher. Or else we can say, well, what we'd like to do is put you through this technical school so that you can go over here and work in technology under Joseph's overall supervision. Or we'd like to put you through this basic training program of how to capitalize on your talents which are in the building trade, so we can assign you to work under Job, and he could utilize you in his expanding program of building up the cities and suburbs around the face of the earth. Then Job will receive individuals, all of whom are balanced, no weirdos. They've all been educated to the balanced way of life. They all keep the Sabbath, so he doesn't have a problem with some wanting Sunday off, some want Wednesday off, some want Friday off, and some want the Sabbath off. So all of his personnel worldwide keep the Sabbath. So when it comes to Sabbath, the whole building program under Job's supervision shuts down. No problem there. And he doesn't have any personnel problems because they all are balanced individuals. They know how to live. So he doesn't have, individuals of different religions. Some follow Buddha and some Shinto and some are atheists and some are agnostics and some are Baptists and some are Foursquare, on and on. But they're all worshippers of the great God. They all keep the same days. They all follow the same laws of life. Plus the fact that all those assigned to work under Job should be working in the building trade. So he doesn't have any square pegs and round holes, so to speak. And he says, well, he shouldn't have done this. This fellow doesn't know which end of the hammer to hold. Maybe he can do something farming. Maybe old Amos ought to have him over here in the agricultural program, and he shouldn't be over here in the building trade. This fellow doesn't know anything to do with the saw except try to play it. Maybe he ought to be a musician, but he's sure not a builder. And then everyone assigned to work under Joseph, say in agriculture, is one that we have determined has the skills to be involved in agriculture. And he's been given basic training so his skills are sharpened. Then when he's assigned to work under Joseph, he doesn't have to give him the basic training. He knows this individual should work in his area. He knows that individual has been given the basic training so he can begin to work and produce, and so forth. So it's going to be quite a highly organized government, and we're going to have that part to do with society. Teaching people how to worship God, teaching people how to love their neighbor, keeping the whole worldwide society, once it's developed, balanced, where there's a balance of social activities, recreational activities, entertainment, cultural activities, family activities, teenage activities, activities for the children, activities for the middle-aged, the old and young, and so forth. And where we have society so geared that every willing participant in that society is balanced. Not a weirdo, not an oddball. No one's out sick behind the barn sniffing glue. No one's going to fly off the handle and start shooting his neighbor because he's being taught to love his neighbor, not destroy him. Now, everyone has a balanced life. If they're of marriageable age, they'll be joined to the right one. We'll give them a lot of counsel so they don't end up with the one they say, boy, if I'd had to do, I wouldn't have married him or her. So we'll keep the society so geared that everyone's life, that he can realize the ultimate from it. And so we can build this worldwide society under God through religious control, bound together through educational control, and that will become the training ground by which future generations can join this great family. I think a lot of us think, maybe not a lot of us, but especially when people are first called, or maybe those who are not called, if they have any concept of a world to come, that when you become a spirit being, you become aloof to and separate from and have nothing to do with human beings. Have you ever thought as a mother what might happen when you go into the kingdom of God? What if you had 3 or 4 small children? Would they still recognize you? Would you all of a sudden spout hair on your chest and a deep, raspy voice? Your hair all of a sudden becomes short. You become a different looking individual. You look like a man. You look down over the bed of your little child, your little daughter that's known you for 5, 6, 7 years. She looked at him and said, "Who are you?" "Well, I'm your mom." You couldn't convince her in 5 years that you're a mom. You'll just always be you. You won't be someone else. You don't go into the kingdom of God and you're changed, and then you go around asking someone, "Who am I?" The other friend says, "Well, I'll tell you, if I might help you if I can find out who I am first." And God had sent some kind of a who's register out of heaven. And one side there's a mirror, and the other side there's pictures, and under the pictures descriptions. So everyone looks in the mirror and he matches up this face with something else in the register and finds, "Oh, this amazing! I didn't realize I was he, or she, or thee." And so Job's looking there, and Job wondered, he's not really Job anymore, and he's wondering who he is. And he finally discovers he's Daniel. Daniel discovers he's Moses. Moses discovers he's Noah. And Noah discovers he's Job. And Job discovers he's Sarah. And Sarah discovers she's Eve. He says, "I'm supposed to be the mother of all living." Why not just make sure everyone is who he is, and you don't have all this confusion, all this scramble for figuring out who everyone is, when we have to be qualified to join Christ and begin to change the world? I think you parents, if you're doing your part and you're making your family work, at least if you're a single, the one individual doing it, you'll go over, but you'll still be responsible for your own children. God would not take you from your children and farm them out to someone else. Who else could handle your children? If you've invested properly, the only way by which those children can be further benefited is for their parents who understand them and who have been with them to continue to teach them. But when mom and dad are changed to spirit beings, they'll have not only greater talent and ability to deal with their children and be home with them, spend a lot of time at home with them, but they'll have that extra capacity and ability to go out and help many others as well. Maybe in Ambassador College, maybe in a certain part of Ambassador College, home ec department, or whatever for the woman. And teach others how they fit into this developing society. And live with your children, eat with them. And they realize, well, she's a lot better cook than she used to be. And Dad's a lot better father and leader. He's a member of God's family, but he's still my dad. But we're not going to be kind of weirdos, and separated from, and God forms our children out to good Baptists to come out of the tribulation. Or resurrects Dr. Spock and says, "You can have them." In other words, whatever you have built into your child, you will either benefit from or have to, accept. But God will not let someone else either tear down or have the burden of trying to build up what you haven't done. You just continue to carry on. You're rewarded for your works. Have people into your home after the Sabbath as spirit beings, human trainees, and show them how it ought to be done. Set an example. Have your children then be examples to others and really be a leader. And participate with them in social activities, recreational activities, entertainment, and so forth. And they'll begin to aspire to join the very family you're a member of. And your children will begin to respect you more highly. You're like, boy, if that's done that much for mom and dad, I've got a lot of hope too. And all this will begin to generate response and participation and cooperation among the human trainees. Then that first generation, those of us who go in, we'll train our assistants all around the world. We'll supervise and direct until that generation that lives over in the world tomorrow becomes spirit beings, and they have their children to deal with. We no longer have the day-by-day obligation of relating to human trainees, and we can be a little bit more behind the scenes and plan for the future a little bit more, but still participate, but not have that day-by-day responsibility like a parent to children would have. Then when their children come in, the second generation, become spirit beings, they deal with their children until they come to accountable age. And then as they're qualifying to join the family of God, they've had their offspring. Each successive generation joins this family. It's a great society. Finally, by the end of the millennium, God will have billions in that family. And the leaders in that society will be over 1,000 years older than the junior members. It's not hard for me to conceive, because there were a time when Methuselah was 968 years old, or 9, and there were little babies being born. So there was a span, even back there, of life over 950 years. And you can imagine how the little boys coming along looked up to and respected the gray-haired patriarch that had been around about 900 years. What was it like 850 years ago? You can imagine some of the stories they could tell around the fire. Great-grandchildren. Back before I grew this beard, Way back yonder. Here's the way it was. There's little children, I'd get real wild. Oh, is that right? Tell me more. Great granddad. Now, they won't be human beings they'll be spirit beings, but they'll still be differential in age. They'll still be the leaders in that society, and others under them, and others under them, and others under them, junior to them, all spirit beings participating in this worldwide society, the worldwide activities. And by the end of the millennium, the only ones who'll still be flesh and blood will be those of the last generation in training to join the family of God. We've got a lot of not only abundant living, but fruitful labor to bring about the end of the millennium and prepare the earth for the billions that must come up. Those billions who have lived and died in the past, or who will die before Christ establishes the world and the world tomorrow. They will all remain dead until after the 1,000 years are up. Because that's such a gargantuan problem that God has to prepare for 1,000 years to begin to solve it. There's no way God could resurrect those billions at Christ's second coming and deal with them. He just has to put them back under, because they come up and they'd be rebellious. He's going to have not only a family of multiple billions, with all the skills we have developed and sharpened down through the 1,000 years, but a society that offers them proper influence, proper control, and ample opportunity to participate in that society and in their nations and whatever job is available for them in that particular nation, so they can begin to relate to society and relate to the economy and relate to all the activities and programs of that family. And then have great awe and respect, realizing that the leaders in this family have been around more than 1,000 years. And that government at headquarters has been there over 1,000 years. And the leaders in that government are much more qualified today. At that time, they were 1,000 years before. And they will remain in office forever. And for the first time, when people are resurrected, they'll begin to respect the government. And say, oh, what we had back in our time was nothing. Now we can see it by way of contrast. Because we can see God's government, it in action, and what it's done for 1,000 years. And we can have confidence in our leaders. They come up in that society and realize there's only one church with its millions of congregations worldwide. And they see that this enables everyone in that congregation, even those that are 1,000 years old in the family of God, still love their father, respect their father, and worship their father. What a fantastic society. That even though they've been in the family for almost 1,000 years, or just over 1,000 years, they still love and respect their father even more so than they did when they joined his family. Say, boy, what a family where members grow in love and honor and respect toward their father. So when they come up and contrast that religion that was really designed by God to relate people to God, so they have a way of expressing their love and honor and respect toward them, and they say, oh, I can see now why God didn't want to tingle bells back there and sniff incense and go around with prayer wheels or whatever. No wonder that was all wrong. No wonder we shouldn't want that anymore, because that was so empty and so hollow and so meaningless as compared to the religion of this world. And so when they come up, they'll finally begin to see the purpose of God's religious system and have a chance of participating in their particular church area through this system of proving they will honor the same Father, the same family. As they come into the family of God, they can join on that same basis of relating to their Father and putting Him first. They'll come up to see there's been one educational program for over 1,000 years. They see a balance of entertainment, a balance of culture. And when Bob Hope men come up like this, they say, oh, I'm embarrassed. Well, I had no idea that entertainment could be used in this particular way for this type benefit of the entirety of humanity. That is so designed that it includes Chinese, Japanese, Mongolians, Indians, Israelites, and all. And it's controlled from headquarters to include them and to adapt to them, but to keep them all in an overall whole. And they'll begin to realize, the head of this family is quite an entertainer. And he's taught his children to really entertain properly. And he's quite a socializer. And he's taught his children in this great worldwide society to be a sociable society. This society is a cultured society. We never dreamed that culture could be used in this way and lift individuals up so high. They'll finally begin to realize, the head of this family is the most cultured individual, the greatest entertainer, the greatest athlete, the greatest builder, the greatest sculptor, and on and on and on. When they begin to see that, they'll begin to realize the men we looked up to and honored back there, they were nothing compared to the leader of this family. And so when those billions come up and see this worldwide society with billions in it, already they are attesting to the worth of that way that they have proved they want to be in it forever. And they see all these nations working together for the good of all concerned. And members of those nations from 1,000 years old in the family of God down to the junior members of that family, plus the trainees that are around. They will say, we can also participate in this family program and join it on an everlasting basis. You know, when those people come up and see the contrast between God's way and whatever way they experience as a composite group, the entire 6,000 years, they're going to want to cast it off as worse than a pile of garbage, putrefying garbage, when they see it by contrast. When they see how great God is, how great His family is, how great His society is, how great His world is, and what kind of a future it has, that's going to really humble mankind in the right way. To where those billions are going to want to repent and say, show us the way by which we too can become members of this family. Say, well, you're actually in it. Just follow the leadership. Just follow the pattern of life. Just follow the way that's being lived in this society, and you can, after a certain period of time, by proving through your conduct you want to join this family, you too can be changed from flesh to spirit to join this great family. And when that family is complete and the Father comes down, He'll have that family ordered back to Him in a relationship of love by way of religious control, so He can cultivate the growing respect and honor of His children toward Himself, so they'll grow closer to their Father right down into eternity. And there'll never be any father-children problems develop. There'll always be that emerging and developing love and concern of all children toward Father and Father toward children. And all the children will be bound together in this great society where they really genuinely love one another, and they're all participating in that way of love, whereby all their love is being deepened and heightened and broadened by the activity, so they're growing in love toward their neighbor. And then they're all ordered to these many different nations, each nation having its particular national responsibility to carry out, so the entire grouping of those nations can accomplish any job or project or activity that the Father directs it to accomplish. And everyone in that family is going to be unlimited in potential. They're all going to be spirit beings. So they can grow in love toward their Father forever. They can grow in love toward their neighbor forever. They can all grow in productivity forever. And the family's going to be so highly organized that the Father will have built in that family every department, every nation that's necessary, so the entire whole family can do anything, accomplish anything, build, produce anything the Father knows is good for the entire family. And there'll never be overproduction in an area or underproduction. It's just balanced production right on down into eternity. There'll never be inflation or deflation in God's economy. And the entire family will share, according to their position and status and what they contribute to the progress of that family. They'll all share in the net gain of the family. So everyone realizes he is rewarded directly in proportion to what he contributes toward the progress of the family. So it'll be a sharing, a producing, sharing family, not only in what we do, but in the way we live, forever and ever. Now, you know, when a person can finally begin to see that, and that's the good news we'll be able to carry over in the world tomorrow, and really begin to spread worldwide and see nations that have never even known anything about the true God, not even trying to pronounce His name. We see their eyes, and maybe their eyes won't even be quite a squint. They'll open so wide the Chinese will say, well, I thought you had squint eyes. He says, I did until my eyes were open. Now I see. Then we'll be able to really have a fulfilling responsibility. And with that kind of a future, with that kind of a reward placed before us to see a world to come and find a new earth in which righteousness dwells, the family following its Father on an ever-increasing basis forever. You know, the short-lived time, as Paul said, this is just a momentary affliction that we go through today. It's short-lived by way of comparison that all the sufferings of this world are not even worthy to be accounted compared to the glory that's going to be revealed in it. See you next Sabbath. Hope to see additional people. Let's all pray that we don't just drop down to 50s and 60s now just because we made 80 for a whole month. See you next Sabbath.
Additional programs and literature available at hwalibrary.com.